Welcome to Influential. Today's book overview is of Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. Don Quixote is a Spanish novel originally published in two parts in 1605 and 1615. It is considered one of the most influential works of literature from the Spanish Golden Age and a founding work of modern Western literature. The novel centers around the adventures of Alonso Quijano, a middle-aged country gentleman from the region of La Mancha in central Spain. Quijano is obsessed with chivalry and lore and buries himself in fantastical novels that feature knights of round tables and damsels in distress, engrossed to near abandonment of all other priorities and duties. Over time, his mind loses grip with reality and slides hopelessly into fantasy. He believes everything he's read about knights and their grand adventures. He believes it's all true, it's history. Quijano resolves to restore chivalry to the world by setting out as a grand knight-errant, roaming the world on horseback in armor, with helmet, lance, sword, and shield, in quest of honorable heroic adventures and duties. He gives himself a new, more appropriate name and title, that of Don Quixote de la Mancha. On his first quest, Don Quixote and his noble horse Rocinante travel to an inn, which Quixote sees as a grand castle. He asks the king of the castle, also known as the innkeeper, wink wink, to dub him a knight in keeping with knightly customs. The bewildered but accommodating innkeeper humors the clearly delusional Quixote, giving him a few light taps on the neck with the flat side of a sword, and dubs him knight. Throughout the novel, you'll see that most people play along with Don's delusions for comedic effect. The newly knighted Quixote returns home and recruits a simple peasant and neighbor named Sancho Panza to be his squire. He promises Panza an island and governorship of said island as a reward for his squirely service. Knights tend to get rewarded these types of gifts, you see. Drawn into the madness, intrigued by the idea of owning and governing an island, and up for adventure in general, Panza leaves his family, wife, and farm to squire with Quixote. He takes his beloved donkey named Dapple with him. The two embark on a series of adventures in which the grandiose Quixote mistakes everyday people and objects for rosy, romantic, chivalric equivalents. Quixote's unshakable idealism and innocence make him an endearing dreamer in the eyes of most readers. There are about 20 or so adventures in the book of Don Quixote that make up the core narrative. For the sake of brevity, I'll mention just 5 or more of these stories to give you a taste of what to expect in the novel. In The Adventure of the Windmills, Quixote mistakes a group of windmills for evil giants. My goodness, a noble knight can't let the world be harmed by evil giants, so Quixote dutifully charges and jousts one of the giants with his horse and lance. Panza objects. It's a windmill, not a giant, to no avail. Quixote strikes the windmill's sail and is sent flying through the air. The scene perfectly captures Quixote's enduring mental illness and sets up an ongoing theme and pattern throughout the book. Quixote sees romantic scenes and acts bravely and knightly accordingly, while Sancho sees reality and unsuccessfully tries to get Quixote to see it too. The contrast between the two, who both believe they're 100% right, provides comedic relief throughout the book. It is most amusing. In the Crysostom and Marcela story, Quixote and Panza spend a night out of doors with some goat herders who share some local news. A lovesick shepherd in the area, named Crysostom, has wasted away and died because he loved an indifferent but gorgeous shepherdess named Marcela. The unrequited love he felt for him killed him, and the funeral was the next day. Would Quixote and Panza like to attend it? Of course they would, and so they did. Deeply moved at the funeral, Quixote delivers a heartfelt eulogy, praising Chrysostom's love while lamenting the fickleness of women. At the funeral, Marcela takes a stand and defends herself. To remain unmarried and live in freedom may go against the social norms of the day, but it is her prerogative. She owes her love to no one, she owes no one her hand in marriage, and she doesn't owe anyone anything really. The story satires idealized courtly love taken to tragic extremes, and serves as a backdrop for exploring themes of love, death, and the complexities of human relationships. In the Galley slaves episode, Quixote and Panza encounter a group of galley slaves on the road, being forcibly marched. Quixote is suspicious of their imprisonment and interviews the slaves as to the reason for their chains. In a gesture of misguided chivalry and simplistic justice, Quixote attacks the guards, believing he is righteously giving aid to oppressed men in need, and liberates the captives. Freed, the slaves shower stones on Quixote and Panza, steal their coats and other resources, and run off. Quixote is often hurt in his adventures, but takes the pains and injuries in stride, as befits a courageous, patient, and suffering knight. This story satirizes chivalrous idealism taken to extremes. After the galley slaves incident, Panza convinces Quixote that they need to head to and hide in the nearby Sierra Morena mountains to evade judgment and prosecution of the Holy Brotherhood. In the mountains, they find a bag on the road that has some money and a notebook full of sad poetry in it. Quixote is struck by the pain in the poetry. He and Sancho find the author, Cardenio by name, in the mountains, and thus begins the tale of the curious Impertinent. This tale is one of several long digressions involving other characters interspersed throughout the book. Cardenio. He has been in the mountains for months, devastated and insane with grief over a betrayal by his childhood sweetheart, Luscinda, and a former friend named Don Fernando. Don Fernando had sent Cardenio out of town on business, and while he was away, Don Fernando stole and married Luscinda. Traitor and scoundrel. Also in the mountains is a woman named Dorthea. She was betrayed by Don Fernando too. In her case, Don had wooed her, proposed to her, slept with her, and then ghosted her. A month or so later, she heard of his marriage to a woman named Luscinda in a nearby town. Enraged, she had headed out to find and give him a piece of her mind. When she arrived in Luscinda's town, she found that Don's marriage to Luscinda didn't take. Luscinda had fainted mid-ceremony, and a letter in her bosom threatened suicide if Don and her family forced her to complete the marriage ceremony. So is Don not married after all? Dorthea and her traveling companion fled to the mountains, but Dorthea ended up pushing him off a cliff, as he turned out to have violent rapist inclinations. Dorthea had been hiding in the mountains ever since, having killed the guy, when she was discovered by Sancho and Cardenio. The entire party is coaxed down from the mountains into a nearby inn. 5 mysterious figures arrive at the inn shortly thereafter, and as Providence would have it, the 5-person traveling party includes Luscinda and Don Fernando. Luscinda immediately tells Don Fernando to beat it, and she flees into Cardenio's arms. Dorthea confronts Don Fernando and demands he makes an honest woman out of her by marrying her. Don agrees, this time for real. This long inclusion in Don Quixote serves to enrich the novel's themes, character development, narrative complexity, and exploration of the human condition. In the second half of the book, Quixote battles with a knight named the Knight of the Mirrors. Said Knight of the Mirrors claimed that his lady is more fair than Don Quixote's lady, a claim that Quixote simply cannot tolerate. At this point, it's important to relate that Quixote has an imaginary girlfriend modeled after a peasant woman in his village named Aldonza. Quixote imagines her to be his high-born lady that he calls Dulcinea del Toboso. He sighs, speaks, prays, and swoons aloud about her beauty and virtues constantly. As both knights charge each other in battle, Knight of the Mirrors has trouble with his horse, and Quixote wins the battle, knocking said Mirrors off his horse, rendering him quite injured and breathless on the ground. It turns out the Knight of the Mirrors is actually a fellow villager of Quixote's who tried to win the battle to force Quixote to return to the village as a winner's prerogative. He lost this battle, but he'll be back again at the end of the book as the Knight of the White Moon. And this time he does achieve his objective and does force Quixote to give up knight-errantry for a year. And during that year, he hopes that Quixote will come to his senses. So these adventures and stories are considered quintessential in exemplifying Cervantes' satire of chivalric literature, his farcical humor, innovative metafictional elements, and the pathology of Don Quixote's delusional yet noble spirit. Don Quixote is celebrated as a pioneering work of modern literature that helped popularize prose fiction and experimented with metafictional structures while providing insightful commentary on individual purpose, truth, illusion, and morality that still resonates today. It is considered one of the greatest and most influential novels ever written.